Fermented hot honey has had quite the rise in popularity in the last couple of years, and it's not hard to see why. It's pretty easy to make, boasts a whole range of health benefits, tastes delicious of course, and is super versatile, enhancing dishes like pizza, fried chicken, cheese, eggs, and even drinks like cocktails and coffee. Trust me, you'll love it. So today we're going to make our own fermented hot honey while covering some of the things going on behind the fermentation and why we can ferment it at all. We'll also talk about some of the safety things you might want to consider when making and storing your own hot honey, plus a couple of ways you can enjoy your own fermented hot honey when it's ready. The list of ingredients for hot honey isn't really that extensive, it's honeys and chilies. Now you can add other ingredients which we'll talk about in a minute, but it really comes down to these two ingredients, so the quality of these ingredients makes a big difference. Now when it comes to fermented hot honey, the type of honey that you use is really important. What we want to use is raw or unpasteurised honey. Most of the honeys available in the supermarkets here in the UK are a blend of the cheapest EU and non-EU honeys. This honey has more often than not been pasteurised, meaning it's been heated to kill off any bacteria and yeast present in the honey and filtered to remove any impurities. This process gives the honey a smoother texture, clearer finish and a longer shelf life, but at the same time it also reduces the natural benefits of the honey. Raw honey on the other hand is unprocessed and unheated, which means it's ideal for fermenting because it retains all the natural enzymes, wild yeast, pollen and all the other beneficial bits and bobs from the bees. It's this mix of probiotic properties in the raw honey that help kickstart its natural fermentation. And there's nothing to stop you from making an exceptional hot honey using the pasteurised stuff, but you just won't be doing any fermenting. Now the types of chilies you choose for your hot honey will play a crucial role in determining both the heat level and the flavour profile of your finished product. First off, for fermented hot honey, I would always use fresh chilies, and I'll explain why in a bit, but it is important to do so. You can use dried chilies if you want, but they would need to be included along with fresh chilies. My number one chili of choice is Fresno, because despite all the hot sauces and spicy recipes I make, I don't like things to be too spicy. I like to enjoy my food. I don't like crying during dinner. I usually wait till after. So Fresno chilies give a great buzz to the hot honey as well as great flavour. I'll also put jalapeno in this category. For me, they are great for a hot honey because they taste great and you get a pleasant zing from them without melting your face off. If you want to step it up a bit in the heat department, you can always add chilies with a bit more punch, like green finger chilies, bird's eye chilies or Scotch bonnets. To be honest, you can go as hot as you like. Go crazy with ghost peppers and Carolina Reapers if that's your thing. I'm not built for that. To make the hot honey, we're going to get our selection of chilies here and remove the tops and start slicing through them. Personally, I like to leave all the seeds and pith in with the chili for my hot honey, but if you wanted to go to the effort of de-seeding your chilies before chopping them up, you go right ahead. Don't worry too much if your slicing isn't that neat or even, it won't really affect the end result of your hot honey. I like to keep it simple with nice round slices like this. Purely from an aesthetic point of view, I think it looks really pretty and appealing, but there's nothing stopping you from chopping up your chilies really fine and using them the same way. As well as the chilies, I also like to include a few other savoury notes in my hot honey that I think really complement it and give it a whole new dimension. My three main additions are onions, garlic and herbs. I use thinly sliced red onion as they're a little bit more mellow than your standard white ones. Peeled and thinly sliced garlic cloves are always an awesome pairing with chilies. All that flavour infuses into the honey, giving it a pungent aromatic hit. And when it comes to herbs, I usually use more robust woody herbs like thyme and rosemary to give that hot honey some extra floral notes. The herbs can be picked and chopped or just picked and placed straight into the honey with the remaining ingredients. Place the chilies, garlic, onion and herbs into a clean sterilised jar and pour over that thick liquid gold to completely cover all the ingredients. You can just leave the honey to settle if you want to slowly cover everything, but depending on the viscosity of your honey, this could be a long wait. So if you're as impatient as me, you can just give everything a stir together with a clean spatula. Once everything is mixed and honey coated, assess the situation, and if any of the veg seem to be sticking out the honey, or there's a great imbalance between the veg content and the honey content, you can always add more honey as needed. Then all there's left to do is leave this to one side for a couple of weeks at room temperature to allow everything to do its thing and ferment. After a day or two, you're going to notice some changes occurring in the honey. Most noticeably, it's going to be a lot looser, a lot runnier, and it'll probably look a bit clearer than it did when we first mixed it. The reason for this is that honey is hygroscopic, meaning it draws in moisture from its surroundings. So when the chopped chilies, onions and garlic are mixed with the honey, the moisture is drawn out of the vegetables. And this is the main reason we're able to ferment our hot honey at all. By adding fresh chilies to the honey, we're able to introduce enough water to bump the overall moisture content just north of 20%. This, combined with the wild yeasts and microbacterial activity introduced by the peppers and already present in the raw honey, makes the ideal conditions for kickstarting fermentation. It's important to make sure that the chilies, onions and garlic are well covered in the honey throughout the fermenting period in order to prevent any mold developing during this time, and you can do this by either flipping the jar over every day to ensure everything gets well coated, or you can just give everything giving a stir with a clean spatula, which is my preferred method.
You'll also want to burp your jar every couple of days just to release any built-up gas. I use these rubber-sealed ones, which are pretty good at letting any sort of high-pressure build-up escape on its own, but if you're using a screw-top jar, it's super important to burp it every day, because if that gas has got nowhere to go, eventually that jar will
Now, when it comes to making fermented hot honey, there are a few things I would recommend to ensure that your end product is not only delicious, but safe to eat. First things first, the jar. Make sure you clean and sanitize that jar before you begin. For all my fermentations, my go-to method is pretty straightforward. Clean the jar in the dishwasher or with hot soapy water by hand. I then place the jar into a hot oven at about 100 degrees C for about 10 minutes to dry and sterilize the jar. I mainly use the jars with these rubber seals, so I don't put these in the oven. I just pour some boiling water over the seal and leave until cool enough to handle. Then after this, put the jar together and the jar's ready to use. Personally, I do prefer to use a glass jar or container when I'm doing fermenting, as they are easier to clean and sterilize properly. Plastic containers in this department just won't cut it. Other things we can do to minimize any risk when fermenting is just make sure that we minimize the handling of the ferment. Don't put your fingers inside the jar or into the honey. You're not Winnie the Pooh. Use clean utensils and equipment when preparing the ingredients and stirring the honey, no double dipping, and then seal the jar to prevent any risks of contamination and monitor it daily to look for any signs of spoilage like mold, bad smells, or any sort of discoloration.
Now, one of the main concerns people seem to have when it comes to making fermented honey with the addition of garlic is the potential for botulism. Now, this is a topic that could completely derail the flow of this video for at least 4 or 5 minutes, so what I've done is I've created a separate video linked in the description where I cover the whole thing in a bit more detail. That way we can get back to our hot honey.
It's been a little over 2 weeks since we began our fermented hot honey, and we're finally at the finish line and our hot honey is ready to go. There's activity in the honey, the chilies, garlic and onion have all been candied. It smells absolutely divine and the flavour is incredible, and it's really spicy. After fermentation, this hot honey can last for up to 6 months, maybe even a year, when stored properly in the fridge. But the exact shelf life can vary based on factors such as the ingredients you used, how clean everything was, and your storage conditions. But if you keep it in the fridge in a clean and sealed jar, you should be golden. From this point on, whenever you fancy adding a little sweet and spicy to a dish, you can just grab it from the fridge and start drizzling. Pizza, you got it. Fried chicken, no problem. Cheese, perfect. Hot dogs, why not? There is very little out there that isn't made better when you add this hot honey.
For the full recipe, head over to my Patreon, where for less than £1 a week, you can get access to all my recipes, including this fermented hot honey. It's a great way to support the channel, and if you already do, I can't thank you enough.